see people joining. We'll just give people a few more moments to join. It's just a couple of minutes past 5. And of course, a big welcome to the UCD College of Health and Agricultural Sciences Neurodiversity Masterclass series. As you know, running on the 4th Thursday of every month. But of course, we had a break in July for summer, and we hope everybody has had a nice summer and are getting back into the swing of things, wherever you are, be it in Ireland or elsewhere in the world. Great. So I think most people are in with us now. So a very warm welcome to everybody. We're delighted to be joined this evening by Miss Sinead Lawless. And Sinead is a painter living and working in Dublin in Ireland. Sinead has most recently exhibited at the Mall Galleries and the Royal Hibernian Academy, and is a professional member of Visual Artists Ireland and the Dublin Art Society. Sinead also currently teaches at the Schoolhouse for Art in Enniskerry, which is in County Wicklow in Ireland. If you would like to learn more about Sinead, clearly stick around for her talk, but also you can check out her website. That's www.sineadlawless.com/about. So Sinead's presentation for this evening is A Path to Painting, Learning to See Through Adopting a Beginner Mindset. And we hope that this session will add to the overall experience of all of the sessions over this past year, taking another angle, we hope, on neurodiversity. So without further ado, over to Sinead, and there will be plenty of opportunity for questions and answers after the presentation. And of course, we will be recording and sending on a recording of the presentation to everybody too. So thank you for joining, and over to you, Sinead.
Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction, Timmy. It's great to be here. Just to give people a bit of background, I have ADHD, and I have noticed that I teach painting, and I am a painter myself. And sometimes I've found that my processes are interesting to people to explain how my processes work. And so today I'm going to attempt to bring you inside my mind. I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll go from there. Okay. Can you see that okay? Yeah, Great. Now, A Path to Painting, Learning to See Through Adopting a Beginner Mindset. Let's go for a wander. Today, I would like to invite you into my process to give you a glimpse into my mind as I work. Please allow this presentation to be a timeout in your day to wander in a new field and smell the proverbial roses for a while, an opportunity to explore and discover. What field? I am an artist and a teacher, and today I will attempt to break down the process of seeing in the context of drawing. Ooh. I strongly believe that everyone has the capacity to learn to draw, and that it can be a powerful life skill. My hope is that by the end of this presentation, you might be eager to try it. The illusion. Paintings can seem to have been created almost magically, the finished product having such cohesion that it seems like it was almost effortless or inevitable. This is not the case. Painting is rarely a performative art, and so the process often remains hidden. Just like a musician or dancer must practice tirelessly to make their work seamless, a painter also must put in these hours. Even still, sometimes in finished work, a painter's struggle may not be apparent. This is all part of the illusion. Do not mistake composure for ease. Lieutenant Tuvok, for those Star Trek nerds out there. Seeing the truth. Like a musician must train their ear, we must train our eye to filter out all unnecessary information, to be able to recognize different elements from each other, at least relatively, in order to essentially reorder them in a new way, to filter and distill information, to abstract. And so a large component of learning to draw is actually learning to see. Drawing conclusions. In 1970, a cognitive psychologist, Richard Gregory, argued that an individual loses 90% of the visual information taken in from the retina to the visual cortex in the brain, and that this gap of information results in a person developing a hypothesis to make up for the deficit. Visual perception is a top-down process. Our life depends on us being able to interpret visual data correctly. It's a very useful adaptation in life, but it's not conducive to drawing or learning to draw. When a hypothesis is wrong, we see an illusion. As artists, we have to overcome the illusion every step of the way. I've included a few illusions here on this screen. The one on the top left is called a Mecha Cube. And if you look at the cubes on the left and right, if you move your eyes, you can see that the cube presents itself in multiple different arrangements. This is the brain trying to give you options because the information is ambiguous to the eye. The second illusion is the Muller-Lyer arrows. And in that horizontal line, if I were to ask you to place a dot at the center, people often place the dot to the right of the center arrow, when in fact, it is the center arrow that is the center, the halfway line of that horizontal line. The third illusion I have here is the herring illusion, which gives the impression that the parallel lines on the left and right are bulging and contracting when in fact they are parallel. So you can see there how visual information can get distorted. We not only believe what we see, to some extent we see what we believe. Richard Gregory. Seeing things. Perceptual illusions arise from misinterpretation by the brain of sensory information. In a sense, all pictures are impossible. They have a double reality. They are seen both as patterns of lines lying on a flat background and also as objects depicted in a quite different three-dimensional space. No actual object can be both two- and three-dimensional, and yet pictures come close to it. Viewed as patterns, they are seen as two-dimensional. Viewed as representing objects, they are seen in a quasi-three-dimensional space. Pictures lying both in two and in three dimensions are paradoxical visual inputs. Pictures are also ambiguous, for the third dimension is never precisely defined. That's an excerpt from the paper Perceptual Illusions in Brain Models by Richard Gregory. Top-down versus bottom-up. Top-down is being able to see the big picture and break it into smaller pieces, using information we already know. Bottom-up is focusing on the detail and sensory input and then putting all the pieces together. Young children are bottom-up thinkers. An artist needs to be able to flip back and forth between these two approaches in order to have vision, but also get the work done. A flexible mind is paramount. Top-down from the brain to the eye. Look at this photograph of an eye. You're an artist and you want to capture it. The emotion and the beauty, the light, the softness, the depth, the likeness of the person, all vague terms. You are motivated by emotion and story and life experience. This is useful to the artist at the outset of a project. It helps us to create narrative and make aesthetic decisions. The brain is an expert at knowing and seeking patterns, so as you start going into production, however, it will guide you by highlighting errors at every juncture. There is no real room for discovery here, and the process is a painful one. If your mind is empty, it is open to everything. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few. Shunryu Suzuki. So here we go again. Look at this reference image again. It is data, information that needs to be studied and extracted. Then that information needs to be filtered down to what is meaningful, and a schematic or a drawing can be designed that will allow for the limitations of paint. When explained this way, it almost seems clinical. Where's the art, the creativity? But that is the misconception. Creativity thrives in a beginner's mind. Endless possibility and willingness to discover. It also takes the pressure off. This is bottom-up thinking, and bottom-up thinking is common in the neurodivergent community. Seeing the truth. overriding our biases. The artist's process of filtering visual data can look a bit like this. Differentiating color from monochrome, recognizing where edges are defined or blurry. This needs to happen in the mind of the artist before they put pencil to paper. Of course, as with most things in life, it is rarely this straightforward or simple. The thinking mind, top down, inevitably gets involved, and therefore we must keep pulling ourselves back to the moment. Artists learn on the job usually, and so it is a constant battle between what you are seeing versus what you think you are seeing. We can become fooled by our own illusion. Paint by numbers. When drawing for painting, one option is to create a schematic to follow, essentially a paint by numbers. Once we have this schematic, it's still up to us to mix the paint and assign the numbers. That may not sound very arty, but the process can yield interesting results. A paint by numbers is clever and efficient, an efficient path if you can stay on it, but it's not easy for humans, especially those of us with excess impulsivity. There are still so many opportunities to get creative in this process. How we see, interpret, subsequently mix and apply color requires much training and practice. Also trying to stay inside the lines, not always so easy. The map. So, forget about what you know about faces. Imagine you are exploring an unknown land and you must create a topographic map. You have to decide where the boundaries and landmarks are and how to illustrate them for later reference. An opportunity to develop your own shorthand, explore and record. Your thinking mind will try to get involved, but practice pushing back. Forget that there are eyelashes or an eyeball. Look only for when the terrain is interrupted and make your mark. The level of detail is totally up to you. Start small and build skills. Slowly move your pen to initially trace images, paying close attention to when there is a change in light or color, and mark it all down. Notice when your brain wants you to generalize or take shortcuts. Note it as thinking, reset, and go back to the seeing practice. Throughout this process, you will be working on your dexterity and pressure, another skill that keeps leveling up the more you practice. As you move to drawing on blank paper, your eye-hand coordination will need to level up. Also, you'll have to hold these shapes in your mind a little longer each time. Stay in the moment. Your thinking mind will keep telling you which lines it thinks you should ignore and why some shapes are more important, more meaningful. It is desperately trying to draw on your learned experience. Ignore it and persist with your mark making. Keep your mind open. See what's really there in the moment. The joy is in the doing, and ideas will find you as your mind is more receptive here. It releases creative block. Inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. Pablo Picasso. So give your thinking mind a break and take a line for a walk. And observe your mind without judgment. Allow yourself to be free to explore and grow. With this flexibility, the discovery never ends. Thank you for listening.
And thank you, Sinead, for your presentation. So before we come to some questions, and it's great as ever to have Mr. Ken Kilbride from ADHD Ireland and Miss Beth Kilkenny from the College of Health and Agricultural Sciences here with us as well this evening. But before we take some questions from our guests this evening, perhaps I could begin by asking you a couple of quick questions. You mentioned bottom-up thinking in your presentation. Could you just explain that to me again, or indeed to all of us? Bottom-up thinking, what's it again?
Okay, so just as a caveat, I am not like qualified in psychology, psychiatry, or neuroscience, but my understanding of bottom-up thinking is when you are taking the information from your environment, your sensory information, you're looking at details, and you're bringing all those things together to create an outcome, as opposed to top-down thinking, where you're coming in with an idea or a premise, and you are then, making little decisions to make that fit all the time. So it's something you'll see in young children, bottom-up thinking, where it's essentially play and exploration, that you're bringing all these ideas together, if that makes sense.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. And I really loved your quote from Picasso as well, about inspiration, but it must find you working. So
yeah, that's it. It's in the bottom-up thinking. If you're focusing on a small detail and you're just moving along without a big idea or almost like an expectation of what you're about to create, and actually enjoying the process more, being more process orientated, then what will happen is ideas will actually come to you. They'll find you working. And it's not just Picasso. Many people and would kind of almost have this idea of the muse has to come in and find you doing what you're doing, and then the ideas will come, as opposed to sitting staring at a wall hoping to be inspired and then have the idea and then create it. It actually happens the other way around, in my experience. That's what it is. It's like, just get painting or drawing, and the ideas will come through that.
Okay. And I noticed on your website that you offer art classes. Can I just ask, do you ever offer art classes for children, or is there such a thing as art classes for children?
I have a 4-year-old, and she thinks she's amazing. So, and she is. So, in a way, there are, at a certain age, you can't teach them, because it's all about them learning to like explore. I have had the privilege of teaching kids between age 8 and 12. Again, a lovely age group where they just really want to play and explore, and really you're just facilitating their exploration as opposed to teaching them anything.
Yes.
I teach predominantly adults, and what's interesting is the adults I teach, it's the fear. They come into class with fear that they're going to be judged, fear of making a mistake, fear of taking risk. And that is something that, as I've been teaching, I find that I'm less inclined, that they need me less to explain to them how to make a certain color or how to draw a certain line, as they need almost encouragement to ignore the inner critic and to work without this expectation, and to know that they're, without sounding patronizing, to know they're in a safe environment. Feeling safe is really important to being creative, and so I try to create that space for them.
Okay, and my second to final question for you. You mentioned about ADHD and creativity, and I'm just wondering, is there, and I want to be so careful not to generalize, because, we can't say that everyone is the same, but is there something to be said for trying to encourage maybe creative arts, be it art, or be it, speech and drama, these activities? Would there be some merit to that, or is it completely individualized? One can never tell from person to person.
I absolutely think it should be encouraged. I think that it, encouraging art, encouraging people to take risks in a risk-free environment, essentially, to explore themselves. It's almost, actually, you'll find that I before I did this talk, I had a look to see if there was a representative for art and neurodiversity specific, and I couldn't really find that in Ireland. But, a lot of artists you'll find are neurodivergent. So it seems that there is some kind of correlation there for sure, although I don't know what the actual data is on that. And it's interesting because the way my understanding of the neurodivergent brain is kind of like taking this information from apparently a wide focus or a disparate focus or associative thinking, and bringing it together to make something, as opposed to, which can cause difficulties in other areas of life when it comes to managing your administration or something like that is actually very, very useful when it comes to the artistic process. And I think people who maybe are in jobs where they're doing the same thing in and out, or they're at a desk all the time doing the same thing, for them to be able to release it in an artistic environment from time to time would be hugely beneficial for them, not to necessarily learn an art, but to just let their brain play and explore and open up. I think that would be really, really beneficial. Mm-hmm.
My very final question. Anytime I go on holiday, I typically like to visit an art gallery or a museum, or both, if I can. And, you know, equally, you know, listening to you this evening and also reflecting back on, I guess, the joy that we get from art in different ways, from just simply looking at it, even if perhaps like some poetry, I don't fully understand it, but it means something to me nonetheless. I'm just wondering, here's my question. I'm just wondering, are there government supports for artists now? Are there sufficient government supports that facilitate artists to try to earn a decent living and create employment, or is there more to be done?
There is definitely more to be done, but there are a lot of initiatives. They introduced now the basic income scheme for artists, which hasn't actually been rolled out yet, but it's in the process of being rolled out, which means that it's a limited number of people will actually receive a basic income, which would be great. And there are many initiatives, but oftentimes, actually, this is the thing, a lot of these initiatives require an awful lot of paperwork, an awful lot of form filling. You know, it's not, if you're struggling with executive function or and stuff like that, it can actually be a barrier to getting through that process. So I'm not entirely sure if it's definitely not very ADHD friendly, but I don't like to point fingers either. There are opportunities out there, but they're limited, and it's amazing the amount of artists that we have in Ireland, and the number of artists is far greater than the amount of support that's there. I can't speak for everybody, but that's just my experience for speaking to other artists. Generally speaking, most of the incentives for artists come in the form of competition. So we'll be asked to apply for an open call where you put work forward for an exhibition, which may or may not sell. So usually you're out of pocket by the time the art gets to the competition itself, although it's great and you're getting exposure and there's all the, you know, it's rare that it actually turns into money for your groceries, you know. But there are bursaries, there are schemes, there are awards, but there's a lot of reading, a lot of form filling. So it's hard to answer that question, actually, Timmy. But,
sure. Yeah. And I mean, in handing over to Ken and Beth now, who'll have questions from the audience, you are right, that piece about form filling. I think I can't remember the context, but I was working with somebody recently who needed to access various supports, but the amount of forms and the complexity of the forms, it was striking compared to another scheme, actually, which the government ran, which was very straightforward. So I think some of them can be overly laborious and complex. But thank you, Sinead, for fielding those questions anyhow from me. And over to Ken and Beth, who have questions from the audience.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Timmy, and thanks for that very interesting presentation, Sinead. There is lots of questions there, so if anybody's more questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we certainly will get to them for you. But, you know, just for people, for myself, you know, my title is Chief Executive of Adhd Ireland. So I'm just probably interested in asking you a couple of questions that will be more ADHD related. Just one of them was just sort of quoting from the presentation, you're saying, holding the shape in your mind a little longer. This is a challenge for people with ADHD. So have you learned any techniques? And
yeah, that's a really good one, actually. I probably could have done an extra slide in there, you know, because working memory is an issue, right? So what I've found is, first of all, it feels like it's a muscle. So, I mean, I have ADHD. So one of the things that I struggle with a lot is time blindness. And I have to use timers for everything. So, and that doesn't seem to improve, right? I don't seem to be able to actually increase my ability to understand or to hold time in my head. But my experience of, and again, I can only speak for myself really, but also I suppose I've seen it in my students, the ability to hold pictures in our minds seems to increase the more we do it, like a kind of a muscle. You are essentially, yes, looking at a reference image or a model in front of you. You're seeing the shape that you want, and then you're having to hold that preciously in your mind while you bring it over to the canvas. And then you have to represent it. And there's so many little skills that are actually in that process. And a lot of times people will actually be very adept at drawing or painting or color mixing, but they lack in that area. And they really beat themselves up about it because they keep going, I can see it and I can't do it. And I can see it and I can't do it. And it's nice to be able to say, actually, that's a whole skill in itself, just there, you know. And you can do it by, you can do smaller exercises by memorizing shapes, you know, looking at simpler shapes and trying to think, okay, what was the order of that shapes? Even if it was a case of a couple of geometric shapes on a page and going, which one was on top, which one was below? So it's a form of visual working memory that you can build up over time. When you're painting and drawing, it's important to keep your reference image or your model in the same eye line as you're painting, and try and only move your eyes as opposed to your head, because as soon as the head movement and the body movement comes into it, it's a whole other space. But it's basically when you come to an atelier, when you come to a classroom, when you come to a school for art, that is what you're doing all the time, is that you're building that memory, that visual memory, but people don't always talk about it. Yeah. Good question, though.
Well, thank you. Just moving, you mentioned it there already, just in terms of, you know, time management and, you know, what's called executive functioning. And, you know, painting is something that people have a passion about and they love. Can you hyperfocus? And if you can you explain it?
Yes, absolutely. Hyperfocus is huge. Can I explain it? Let me think. Well, I mean, generally I'll find it with my students and with myself, you get into a state of flow, I suppose would be a good way to describe it. And, you know, other things can fall by the wayside, including like your need for breaks, your need to eat, your need to, you know, you can get into such a hyper focus that you feel physically unwell. But we're trying to maybe pull back from that a little bit and just talk about, in terms of painting, what's interesting is a lot of painting, I use oil paints. A lot of it is managing your materials and trying to keep things a bit clean and trying to keep things functioning. And when you get into a hyper focus of painting, that all falls by the wayside, and you can end up making a bit of a mess because you want the pen because you're in the zone and you're trying to get in there. So you're trying to almost create situational fluency in the brain, trying to be able to switch between hyper focus and essentially kind of almost like a scatter focus, and trying to build that up again, like a muscle, for want of a better word, trying to build up some kind of flexibility in there, because hyperfocus can be detrimental to the painting and drawing process if you become too reliant on it. Generally, you know, does that answer the question? I'm not sure. I feel like I went off on an ADHD tangent there, and I kind of got distracted by three other thoughts at the same time.
That's what we're here for. Just on the same thing, and you had mentioned it there about, you know, and I always talk when I'm talking about ADHD, and you talk about, you know, when we talk about the Ferrari brain for people with ADHD, very quick thinking, linking lots of ideas together. And so again, forgive me for, you know, positing the question this way, but are ADHD people naturally better artists?
Oh, you know, at the end of the day, right, an idea is no good unless it's created. You know, it's no good to anybody if you have all the amazing thoughts but you can't get around to creating them. It's hard to say that. I couldn't possibly say if people with ADHD are better artists. I can't. No, I'm sorry. I'm not gonna go on recordings. No, I can't do that. But what's interesting is with the ADHD brain is you'll find people, they have amazing ideas, but again, it's that process of getting, you know, you get stuck on you could get stuck on paper choice. You know, you get that kind of, what's it called, analysis paralysis, or the, you know, you get the timeout and you're just kind of standing there. And what I would encourage people with ADHD to do is to just start, you know, and because of course perfectionism also kicks in. It's all very complex, isn't it, when it gets to that, you know, but the ideas are there. And this presentation actually, you know, that top down, that the ADHD mind of creativity, it's, you know, the ideas are there. And sometimes, because when we're going to actually do the process, the idea doesn't happen instantly, and we're all like kind of looking for this instant thing. There's there's this kind of propensity to give up and move to the next hyperfixation or move to the next novelty, because the novelty wears off so fast, right? Because the dopamine's not kind of kicking in there for us, because we have this great idea and we go to create it and it's not happening, and we're like, ugh, and next, you know. And so in a way, working on processes like this, where you take that pressure off to create something great and just practice this as a mindful practice, even, you know, will mean that by the time if you've done this enough, by the time you have that idea, that you'll have the Ferrari, but you'll also have the road to drive the Ferrari on, which would be great, you know, if that makes sense. I feel like if that makes sense is like my add-on to every sentence, if that makes sense.
No, and again, I'd say I made tons of notes when you were speaking, like about 20 questions. But yay. I do note, it's not here for me, that it's here for the people who ask questions. I see there's actually 20 questions in the Q&A, so maybe we should pay more attention to those than what I'm going to ask. So I think Beth has the next question.
There's a couple of kind of questions and comments about kind of the kind of knowing how to play and kind of losing the ability to play as adults, or maybe we never had it. So I'll just take one of these questions as an example. So Wendy says, what if as an adult I have an understanding that in my youth I was never in an environment that allowed me to learn or to play or create? How do I find this now as an older adult?
That's a good one. Play is so important. I think we do have the ability to play, but what's happening is, in my experience, is there's that inner voice, and we have an inner child and we have an inner parent kind of voice. For once, I know that can sound a bit, I don't know, actually, I'll just continue. I won't go off on a tangent. But that inner parent voice, that's what we need to work on there. That inner coach, that inner parent that tells us that it's okay to play. So it's giving yourself permission to play, to make mistakes. Start with something that doesn't have any you know, there's no cost to it. Get a sketchbook and don't show anybody. Nobody else has to see it. It's just for you. And allow yourself to witness that voice in your head that's telling you something like, this is a waste of time, you know, you're no good at this, all those negative things. Because I find that the negative voice is the one that stops you from playing, because we naturally want to play. It's natural in us, and adults lose it because I think we're edited and judged. And you actually see it in kids. You see it happening at around the age of maybe 10, 11, 12, where kids start to feel edited and they edit themselves. And I've seen it in my own classes when I taught kids before. The younger ones, there's no limitations to what they can do. And then suddenly this voice comes in that goes, I shouldn't do that because I will be judged. So it's really working on that voice. There's a great book called The Artist's Way by I think it's Julie Cameron. And I would highly recommend anyone who wants to find that play to get that book, because she talks about that inner critic and how to overcome it, and going on artist dates with yourself and journaling as a way to help you get that voice out. And it never fully leaves. We all know, we all have it. We all have that internal voice, right? That inner kind of saboteur that's just there, you know, trying to tell us, hey, you know, but it's about being able to see it and have some self-compassion and say, it's okay, I'm learning, I'm playing, this is okay, this is fine. If that answers that.
Yeah. That's great, thanks. And I suppose the same would apply, you know, if you did have a young person who had been kind of enthusiastic about kind of art and creating, and then suddenly they were kind of feeling that they weren't good enough to do it anymore, you would kind of give them the same kind of advice.
And there's nothing wrong with wanting to improve, you know, so it's kind of a hard thing to, you know, you can't just say everything's brilliant all the time, because then you won't improve. You can't be like, oh, sure, everything's excellent. So there is a balance to be found there, but it you know, not to sacrifice the baby for the bathwater, you know, it's that's the thing, isn't it, you know?
Yeah. I'll just take another question here, Ken, if that's okay. This is a question from Sue, and it mightn't be relevant to you, but she's asking if Sinead has if you have any visual processing challenges, and if so, how has this impacted or influenced your art?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I don't have any visual processing challenges. I think I'm quite blessed in that way. I'm not sure. Does that mean like visual impairment, or is it? Yeah,
I'm not sure what the specifics around that way. Maybe she could maybe Sue will elaborate if she has any more comments. Ken, do you want to take a question?
Indeed, there was actually one there that really touched my heart as much as anything else. It comes from Rita. And how do you start working on days you don't want to? And part B to the question was, also, can you share your morning routines? As is one of the things I struggle with. I struggle with mornings every day.
Yeah. So do I. But you know, having a young child is an incentive, because they don't let you stay in bed, right? So that's probably one of the reasons why I'm more productive. The more of a schedule I actually have, the more productive I get. And the schedule almost has to be imposed by somebody else, like, you know, obligations or whatever. But something I have it here, actually, something I use a lot is I use a time cube. So it's analog. So it's not my phone, because you know yourself, if you open up the phone, sure, listen, you're off on Instagram or TikTok or something, right? The time cube's really handy. And what I'll say to myself is I usually, 15 is kind of my magic number. And you literally turn it on its side and it goes, it puts the thing on. You can get them on Amazon or whatever. And what I'll do is I come into my studio and I put the 15 on, and I give myself a task like, okay, just prepare. And for 15 minutes, all I have to do is prepare. I know that in 15 minutes, I'll be free to do whatever I want. So it takes the pressure off thinking, oh, I've got so much to do. It's like, it's just 15 minutes and you can do shorter if you want to. And when I'm painting, it's funny. I mean, when I'm painting, I paint in 15-minute blocks. Now, hyperfocus is the thing, right? So this is another way to break hyperfocus as well, which I know hyperfocus sounds like an amazing thing, and it is, but it can be a bad thing sometimes. Is I put the timer on, and after 15 minutes of painting, regardless of how I'm feeling about what I'm painting, I break and I step away from the painting. Sometimes you're like, I just want to do a couple more brush strokes, and sometimes I do, but you know, for the most part, I obey the timer and step back. And then what I'll do is I'll rotate the picture, or I'll step back, or I'll have a few pictures on the go at the same time. Having a sketchbook on the go, setting yourself up with a couple of different things to work on really helps, because novelty is a big issue for me. I need to have something that I have to follow the dopamine. And then I also set a timer when I'm finishing up for the day, and I may only have worked a few hours. It's not that I'm like, it's 9 o'clock at night, that I have this pact with myself, and it's a pact with my future self that I will set up for tomorrow. And what I do is I put something out. It might be a brush or some paints or a painting that I'm excited to work on, or a picture, something that's going to give me a little boost. And I put that out, so the next day Sinead comes in, she automatically is excited about working on this new thing. So I set up like a novelty for myself for the next day. And sometimes it involves buying like a really nice shiny notebook or a pencil or something, you know, but it's setting yourself up and knowing that that's waiting for you, for your future self. That helps me to continue the productive cycle. You know, that's what I do anyway.
And here's one that probably goes back a little bit to one of the questions I was asking, but I think it's worth asking because it's, again, a little bit of a two-parter. What was it about Van Gogh's work that speaks to so many people? May he have been neurodivergent?
I mean, probably. He's amazing. So Van Gogh, I think what it is about his work, first of all, he was amazingly prolific. He used to create like paintings in one day. They're so accomplished. And he was a master of color. And I think color is something that is hugely, I don't know what it does to our brain, but it's like food. It really feeds us. It really excites us. Now, obviously, everyone sees color a little bit differently, or you know, color is not for everybody. But you know, broadly speaking, color is very exciting. And maybe it comes back to us being cavemen and looking for the berries that were the brightest, and we're like, oh, you know, it's really exciting. It sends chemicals into our brain when we see bright colors. And Van Gogh was an expert at placing colors side by side that would actually kind of fight and vibrate off each other to create tension. If you actually look at his work in black and white, if you take the color out, the tone and the structure is amazing, and then you add the color in, it's just, so I think it's that. And then also the vigorous brushwork, and yet he creates such cohesion. You're looking at this image that's essentially chaos in its brushwork and its color, and yet it comes together in this beautiful whole. You know, it's like it's the sum of its parts is greater, or the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And so that's why I think he's such an interesting painter. Absolutely love his work. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
You got a free critique there as well. Just going back to the concept that you were bringing up, and the question was from Daisy Day. Do you think that one's creativity declines as logical thinking is reinforced? And is there a way to intentionally train bottom-up thinking skills for adults?
Can you say that one again? I'm intrigued. Can you ask it?
So, do you think that one's creativity declines as logical thinking is reinforced? And is there a way to intentionally train bottom-up thinking for adults?
Yes, well, yes, okay. So yes, creative and logical thinking. So that's the thing. That's the interesting thing about this is the bottom-up process, which it is logic in essence, because you're following a series of steps, and you're not kind of making up any data, you're not speculating anything, you're really just following steps. In essence, is logical. I mean, children are quite logical, aren't they, the way that they approach day-to-day life. And I think this process of the drawing that I was talking about earlier, where you actually follow the line and try and ignore the data, the perception of the brain of what the image actually is, that's a way to improve your creativity. If you work in there, your creativity will expand, in my opinion. I mean, I'm no expert in that, but so I don't think that logic is the opposite to creativity. Do you know what I mean? But yeah, I actually think it's a good place to start with that. You know, and you can build building blocks from there, and the creativity will just come in. Again, it finds you working.
Just on that, you talk about the process there in terms of, you know, bottom-up thinking and being creative and following the process through. And is the process you're describing, do you think that could be used in other creative forms? You know, dance. We talked about improv comedy before you came on. Mm-hmm. Acting, anything like that?
Well, if you think about dance is a really interesting one, because if you think about dance, when somebody goes into the dance studio to learn from a choreographer, the dance is broken down into really, you know, it's really broken down into its components, its steps. And I'm sure to somebody who's just learning a dance, to the viewer, it would look very cumbersome and it would look very awkward, and it would be like, oh, that's not going to work. And it's only when you put it together after lots and lots of practice and get that muscle memory going, and then put the music to it, that it appears to be this almost inevitable organic thing that's happening. And it's really amazing to watch. But it starts there with this really slowed down, mechanic, broken down process. So I've kind of lost my train of thought a bit, but so, you know, what was the question? Sorry. The dance is really, yeah, I'm sorry, you have to ask me the question.
Just in terms of, you know, is the process applicable to other art forms, or the creative process in general?
Absolutely. And like, if you think about a musician as well, musicians have to go and they have to learn music theory. They have to, like, if you're playing guitar, you know, it doesn't happen quickly. It's almost a very bottom-up approach of, this is how you hold the instrument. This is the first note. This is the second note. It takes a long time before you get to play a song, or, you know, but as you go through that process and showing up every day, putting in the minutes, putting in the hours, putting in the time, the creativity comes to you. It's funny that with painting, people seem to think it's the other way around, because they see the painter as being divinely inspired and having this flurry of paint and splashing it about, and it just happens. And it's actually, no, it's pretty much the same as learning an instrument. You're putting, and there's a misconception there, I think, sometimes, because yeah, painting, the process is kind of hidden. It's not performative usually, and so it's hidden. People appreciate that when you see a a band or you see a dance, that people have had rehearsal and rehearsal and rehearsal, and then they have the stage and they perform. And essentially with painting, the painting is the performance, right? But it's asynchronous, so you're not quite getting to see all the work that's going into it. And then also think of all the sketchbooks that preceded that painting and all the work that preceded that.
Well, thanks for that. Just a quick question for yourself. Why painting?
I don't feel like I have a choice, Ken.
Okay.
It chose me. It's an interesting one. When I was a kid, I always, my grandfather actually, he was a mechanic, but he was also an artist. He went to art college, and he gave me, you know, he sat with me and he painted and drew with me, and I think that just kind of instilled a sense of I loved painting and drawing. But for me, drawing it's when I'm drawing, my brain is able to actually release, and it's almost meditative. It helps me to relax. And this is, again, drawing for the sake of drawing, like what I was describing in the presentation, as opposed to trying to produce a piece of art. I'm talking about just the process of tracing lines and copying things. And then paint, it's that color. It's a color for me. It's food. It gives me energy. It's novelty for me. And I've had many hyperfixations in my life. I have many hobbies, many unopened boxes of things that I've purchased. But art seems to just persist for me, which is lovely. I'm glad I've one that just sticks, you know. So yeah, it's always been that.
Just the very first one, the first question that came in from Richard. Is it more difficult for a neurotypical person to be a bottom-up thinker? And he says, as an aside, love the Tuvok quote, "You fellow Voyager."
Oh, I love it. Yeah, huge Trek fan. I don't know. I don't know if a neurotypical person is more of a top-down thinker. In my experience of what I know of as neurodivergent, neurotypical people, I think so. I think that the world is driven by idea and perception, and it's nice to be able to actually just be able to own the fact that we look at detail. And I do, and I can't speak for the whole neurodivergent community, but I definitely am detail and process orientated. And I find that I've in my lifetime hit a lot of walls with people who I assume or have told me or seem to be neurotypical people who can understand why I'm focusing so much on the detail or the process. And they're like, you know, and I've hit that wall in my life many times. And now, understanding the bottom up versus top down approach, I feel more confident saying, well, actually, my way of thinking is perfectly valid. My brain is perfectly valid. It's not, you know, it's not an error or it's not broken. It's just a different way of thinking and working. And in fact, you know, it can actually be more useful to think this way sometimes, rather than just assuming confidence or leaping to conclusions or jumping around. I have to go through all the steps. So I think that in my experience that is, but I couldn't say for sure if neurotypical minds are, but I would love if somebody would come and answer that. That would be amazing. If we have a scientist out there that could answer that question, because that would be fantastic. I'd love to know.
Okay. And probably just a second question that actually just randomly came in from Richard just said, is creating a piece of art almost therapeutic for someone with ADHD?
It is, if you can let go of the thinking. It really is, and I promise you that. So it doesn't happen overnight, but if you keep going in with the thinking about what you want the piece to be, you know, it's torturous. It's actually torturous because it will not match the expectation. But if you take the idea, so you have to start top down, you have to go, well, why am I painting in the first place? What do I want to paint? What do I want it to look like, if it's a commission or if it's something else? You know, so that has to happen initially. The idea has to be there. Otherwise, you know, you may as well be a printer just printing something out. You know, the artist comes in first and it thinks top down. But then once the process of production begins, it really is about, it's almost kind of keeping your ego in check a little bit and kind of going, okay, you know, these are just shapes and colors and lines. And as soon as you think, you know, oh, it's going to be this thing, stop and come back and just go, it's shapes and colors and lines, and keep pulling yourself back. And when you do that over time, it becomes, I mean, almost like a Zen practice. It becomes like a mindfulness practice where you're pulling yourself constantly back to the doing. And so long as that initial, goal has been set and you're staying within the parameters of what that goal was, then yes, it can be really therapeutic, because you don't have to worry about what it's going to be. And then it gets fun. Then it gets relaxing, but not always.
And here's a question, and it's a very much an ADHD question, and it comes in from Natalie. Thanks very much, Sinead. Do you have any trouble pacing yourself with relation to taking on too-minute work projects, etc.? If you do, how do you alleviate it? And what do you think of a non-artist could do as an alternative? Could do as an alternative to you with painting, for instance?
Yes, I do have an issue of pacing, and I have an occupational therapist that helps me with that. And even to this day, people will say to me, double the time you think it's going to take to do this, don't take on to me. It's a constant struggle. And I do have an occupational therapist that will help me to manage that. And I generally find that if I schedule things and if I use my calendar effectively, I can kind of, not get myself in too deep, but it's always an issue, taking on too much and then wanting to do everything to the nth degree, wanting to do everything to the level of perfection that I want to do it, putting in the extra hours and all this kind of stuff. It is always an issue. So burnout has been an issue for me, and I have actually burnt out in the past, but I've gotten better at that. But I'm always learning, and that does not seem to come naturally to me at all. So that way would be good to have an answer for that one. With regards to an alternative to the drawing, it's like anything that you could do step by step. So if the process that I've put forth here, again, it's akin to, I think, the mindfulness practice. And so I would say, depending on what your ability is, you could actually apply the same thinking to something like even Tai Chi or something like that, because you're repeating something regularly, and you are, having to bring yourself back into the moment, having to, take these essentially simple steps. Simple is arguable, and do them repeatedly over and over again. But it's about having a practice. So it's not just about doing a drawing here and there. It's about saying, I'm going to do this for 20 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day, whether it's learning an instrument, which could be amazing for your brain. I highly recommend that. Drawing, Tai Chi, something like that, and saying, regardless, that you'll dedicate so many minutes a day using your time cube, and just do it, and just show up. And some days you'll be like, I don't want to do this, but still show up, and even sit there and be angry about it, but just show up.
And just as a compliment to you, someone actually put into the Q&A there a couple of moments ago, thanks, great talk. I've actually ordered the timer already.
Yes. I should get an affiliate program, shouldn't I? I should.
We can send the commission on later.
Yeah, exactly.
Just a question then comes in from Claude. Going back to, because I sort of missed this a little bit myself, because I was probably taking notes on it and actually listening. So how do you train top bottom thinking for those of us who are bottom up thinkers?
Oh, I don't know. How do we do that? I actually don't know if it can be done to go the other way around. You know what I mean? So bottom-up thinkers, if you're a bottom-up thinker and you really are always focused on detail and sensory input, I'm not sure how you'd ever get to being a general. So top-down would be more like thinking in the general and then making that smaller and smaller. And I'm not sure you can do that. I guess that comes from, in a way, I suppose you could think about art appreciation. You could go to a gallery and you could think about looking at paintings and maybe why the artist might have painted things a certain way. So you're getting into more like ideas and concepts and perception. But I'm not entirely sure. It's a good question, but I don't have the answer, I'm afraid.
Okay. Just a couple more questions. There was one in from Gail. Thanks very much. I've learned so much practical things myself. Gail is saying, I have a child who has multiple neurological diagnoses and he has a unique art style. If someone wanted to contact you, or is there somewhere you can look at his drawings and paintings and give me an insight and how he thinks he's doing?
Oh yeah, no, I'd love to.
If
Maybe
anybody indeed wanted to get in contact with you, maybe with classes or anything like that, how would they do that?
Well, I can give my email address, but I'm not sure. Is Timmy or Beth? Could I do that here, or is it?
If you want to stick it in the chat, yeah.
I'll stick it in the chat. I'll stick my email in the chat. And if anyone wants to contact me, oh, wait a second, I can't. Oh, sure, there's chat. I've got Q&A open, sorry. So hosts and panelists, and I can sing. Oh, I can't seem to send a chat out to everybody.
Well, if you send it to me, I'll send it out to everybody then.
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. And you can email me and I will do my very best to take a look and get back to you, because it really is a passion of mine to mentor and to help people on their creative journey. It feeds my soul, my energy to help people to find their creative path. So I would love to see their work.
Okay, well, that's good. That's just want to say thanks for all that. And that's probably all the questions I have at the minute. I don't know if Beth or Timmy has any other ones.
We don't have too long left, but Beth, do you have any concluding questions that you'd like to add?
I think we probably addressed most of the questions that are in the Q&A.
Sorry, can I just, forgive me, I'm going to ask that leading question again. I'm going to get Sinead to answer this one. Thanks for sharing your experience. This is from Rebecca. Do you feel that folk who identify as neurodivergent have an advantage within the world of arts because of their methods of thinking and viewing the world?
I do, but I'm biased.
Yeah.
But like, if you think about it, you know, creative thinking is trending right now. You know, it's trending. Think of all those big companies, Google, Facebook, all the rest of it, and think about how they're engaging creative minds and how it's really become apparent that we do need creative minds to get to the next level. You know, and I love that we're being embraced more and more, I think. Mm-hmm.
Oh, indeed. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks,
well, I think we're just approaching 6 p.m. and I'm really pleased that we had, I think, a little bit of extra time for discussion this evening. And I loved all the practical tips and advice as well about hyperfocus and how you approach that, and your ideas about getting that schedule for the day. And of course, the timer, which I think is something that will live long. Can you get? I presume you can get those online in. I
think I got mine on Amazon, but I'm sure you can get them anywhere. I mean, I'm not sure now with customs and all that kind of stuff, but there are a few. Is it Sensational Kids in Kildare? They have things like that, I think. So there's a few different places you can get them. But Analog Time Cube, I believe it's called. Okay. And this one's 15, 20, 30, 60, and there's a 1, 1, 3, 5, 10 as well. So
all right. Okay. Great. Lovely. So a big thank you again, Sinead, for joining us this evening. We really enjoyed your presentation, and also in answering the questions, you brought a great, I think, energy and thoughtfulness to them. I know we will have another talk in September, and Bet, if you have the slide, we might just display that again. But I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Next up in September, we've Michael Perlin. Something's happening here, but you don't know what it is. How jurors misconstrue autism in the criminal trial process. Okay, so again, a great diversity in our topics. So one to look forward to again. But a big thank you to everyone. Beth Kilkenny, of course, from College of Health and Agricultural Sciences, Ken Kilbride from ADHD Ireland, and most of all, Sinead for joining us. And if you want to find out more about Sinead, that's sineadlawless.com. So thanks, everybody, and have a lovely evening.
Thanks, Timmy.
Thank you. Thanks, Timmy. Thanks so much, Sinead. Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Take care all. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.